But what set this bag of pears apart from the other pears on display was the size of the pears in the bag. Now, again, most of the mums in the audience, and probably some of you if you're dads, would appreciate how big is the average school lunchbox? The average school lunchbox is about that big by that big. It's just the fact of life, right? Do you know how difficult it is to get a big size piece of fruit into a little container that fits into the average size school lunchbox? It's pretty challenging, and I don't like to have a lot of extra fruit sitting around. So I shop for, and I love buying pears and apples that are small because I know I can cut it up into fours, pop it in the little container, stick it in the lunchbox, and that fruit never comes home uneaten. So it's all about success for me in finding a lunchbox fruit solution. What's interesting is this bag of pears, about 1.5 kilos, was selling for $1.99. What's even more interesting, I would have happily have paid $3.99 because this product solved a problem. Yet nowhere on this bag does it tell me exactly what the solution small pears provided. And that, to me, is the missed opportunity. So when you look at what we're up against in terms of both people selling real fruit, and when we say, how does our industry respond? And I'll make a caveat here. I know it's not everyone. And I know that we've got some great samples of fresh produce packaging in the marketplace. But a majority of people are still underutilizing their packaging. And that's really that's the group I'm trying to focus on here. So our ability to respond was this. I think the retail environment and our competition is getting too significant, and our desire to drive substitution is too great for this to almost sit as acceptable anymore. If nothing else, it's wasted opportunity. So, second point. Who's competing in my space? Now, you know what? I think it's lovely. I think we are so incredibly optimistic as an industry, and that's one of the reasons that we all love it, is because we really do believe in our fruits and vegetables. And we know about their goodness, and we know that they're physically beautiful, and we know that they're colorful, and we know that they're vibrant. And guess what? Every sophisticated packaged food marketer knows that too. Because they now are particularly noticeable to me over the last 4 to 6 years. They now want to be associated with fresh. Why? Because of all the things that we love. It's good for you, it's healthy, it's beautiful, it's bright, it's vibrant. Does that not sell you the concept of fresh on those packages? They're beautiful. I look at those and I go, even though the nutritional string attaching them to fresh fruits and vegetables is quite tenuous, the fact is they want to play in our space. And they're doing a fantastic job of it. How do we combat the threat? This is what we put out to communicate health, energy, vitality, color, phytonutrients, good for you. This is what we put out. Now, the interesting thing is that when you actually look at the content, of course, none of it's authentic. None of it's very real, right? So you look at some of these things have 2 to 3% real fruit or real fruit juice, some up to 60 to 70 to 80%. But what does that packaging say to you? That packaging says we own a certain degree of fresh fruit and vegetable usage. And in my opinion, they're treading on our space. So if we expect to drive the substitution opportunity, we have 2 options. Number 1, we allow them to continue to tread on our space and hope that people will see through the packaging and realize that we're actually the real fruit and vegetable people. Or we start to teach ourselves to think more like packaged food marketers and get more aggressive on our packaging. Something to consider. The third trend that I think is worth noting is we have huge opportunity to take advantage of trends. And I want to ask you guys a question. How many of you in kind of December or January every year like clockwork go to the internet and do a search on top 10 food trends? Download the paper, bring it to a board meeting, and base a discussion around how you're going to optimize that year's top 10 trends as part of your marketing. Does anybody do that? A couple people? Well done. Do you know how hard it is to get top 10 trend information anymore? You type top 10 food trends into Google and you get over 15 million hits. There's actually no reason for us to not be more cognizant of trends, because trends to me are the fastest way we're going to get substitution growth. Why do I say that? The Atkins diet proves substitution is possible, but it's not easy. So the Atkins diet trend was a revolution, kind of peaked around 2003, 2004. 1 in every 11 Americans was on Atkins during its peak. 1 in every 11. That's huge. What impact did it have? So Atkins, of course, was a diet based on reducing your intake of carbohydrates and increasing your intake of proteins, and then later in the diet, complex carbohydrates. So who took the big hit? Well, the research says pasta declined about 8%, rice sales were down. We all know, even in Australia and New Zealand, potato sales were impacted by the diet. But what was interesting is that bacon and egg sales hit an all-time high, because that's one of the products that they could substitute. And us Americans, we substitute to bacon and eggs pretty quickly, okay? But what struck me is the Atkins nutritional brand, which is a brand that was basically released in 2000, by 2004 was a $100 million standalone category. And it all happened because of substitution, right? So substitution as a concept is very, very possible and very doable for our industry. But the key is finding the link or the hook that makes consumers actually want to change their diet and substitute. And I think for our industry, some of that opportunity lies in trends. So the more that you can go out and do trend research, the more opportunity we'll start to find. So for example, the Food Channel, I'll just read you a couple. One of the trends was called, for 2011, the canning comeback, right? This whole trend towards doing more meal preparation at home, the downside or the offside of the recession in the United States. Preserving and canning's back on the hit parade, right? We all know knitting's coming back, canning probably makes sense. Now, the question is, what's the potential opportunity for a trend like that as related to your packaging? There's cross-tie promotional opportunities, there's potential opportunities to tie into that with some on-pack messaging. But if we use trends as a basis for how we think about our produce packaging, we'll find a way to link the trend to the message that we communicate, and that's one opportunity to drive substitution just that little bit further, because the trend puts us into the mind space of the shopper. And that's where we need to be operating. We'll talk a little bit later about men in aprons. Woohoo! High time when that trend came around. We'll talk a little bit later about some products starting to target that. Okay, so just staying with trends for one final moment. There's a trend emerging, and for the first time probably in 20 years of marketing, actually scares me. And especially in the context that we're all about wanting to double consumption and drive that via substitution. And it's the trend I call, quote unquote, who owns healthy? In the United States in January when I was up there, what I saw for the first time that I can remember in the last 2 to 3 years is packaged food companies responding aggressively to the obesity epidemic. Does anybody know how they're doing it? Processed food companies are starting to change their formulations to now be healthier. And that in itself isn't a problem, because overall that's good for humanity. The interesting thing about that in our world is that they are now screaming that from every opportunity they have on their packaging. So you see cereal boxes now with a big triangular notice in the corner that says, now with less sugar. You see other products, pastas, canned good, with the big bright starburst saying, we've taken away the salt. It's not just what they're taking out, it's also what they're adding, right? Because what we can't compete on is additives that drive health benefits. You understand what I mean by that? So at the top we have a range of cereals that have now started to add things like flax. And then the packaging says now higher in omega-3s. They start to add things like hemp oil, which I think is good for cholesterol reduction. Waddy's New Zealand, whole kernels, no added salt or sugar, peanut butter. Look at the Fit Kids. I mean, this is an oatmeal that was significantly high in sugar, but look at the corner. Now less sugar. There's actually brands in America now making premise around no icky additives, and it's a product for cereal, it's a product for children, right? And the wording on the package, big bold down at the bottom, says no icky additives. To me, it goes back to, if I'm a mom and I stopped my son eating Lucky Charms, a personal favorite of mine growing up, stopped him eating Lucky Charms because all of the bad press about the high sugar content in food. And now I'm strolling down the aisle and I've got my trolley and I'm looking at the cereal display and a big bold sign in yellow in the corner says, now with 35% less sugar. Do you really think that I'm going to pick the pack up, turn it around, read the label, and still try to figure out how much sugar's in that pack? Or am I going to respond instantly to the message that this is now better for my baby? Fantastic, give me 5 boxes. Who owns healthy when packaged foods change their formulations or add goodness back in and then shout it from the rooftops? How do we claim that we own healthy? Can you see how much untapped opportunity there is for us to do more with these packs? Okay. I want to check in, right? Find a neighbor, because these things you've been sitting for a long time this morning. Turn to your neighbor and say, have you found it interesting? Have you found it confronting? Have you found it wrong? Turn to your neighbor, you get 2 minutes. Right, Carrie, do we have 2 minutes? 2 minutes? Turn to your neighbor, 2 minutes, and then I'll come back and just check in. Start to finish off. Then I want you to would love to just grab some feedback. So, is this making sense? Does this have some resonance in terms of the challenge and the opportunity? Any comments? Anybody want to throw up a hand and give an opinion? Please? Yes, sir.
I'll give you 2. First one is most of the produce branding in this country is controlled mainly by 2 companies.
Yeah.
Coles and Woolies, which is their own brand.
Yeah.
And then secondly, I've always thought with produce packaging that the produce itself has to be the star. So, okay, you can put a piece of produce inside a package,